Photographers attempt to capture the feeling of a moment in an image. This can be challenging when it comes to trying to capture the feeling of vast expanses like the Grand Canyon or the Great Migration across the Serengeti in Africa. Fortunately, we are not completely limited by the width of our lens. Let's work with Photoshop's Photomerge feature to create a single panorama from multiple images. There are a lot of photographic tips for taking good images to use in a series of panoramas, like ensuring you have adequate overlap between the images so the software has enough information to match up and keeping exposure consistent. If we take reasonable images, though, Photoshop can actually turn them into panoramas with little, if any, further intervention on our part. Let's take a look at this wonderful process using Photomerge. We actually are going to start by not having any of the images open. We're going to go to the File menu and come down to the Automate. When I first learned about this feature and it first came out, this just did not seem intuitive to me. So remember that it's found under Automate on the File menu. Then we'll come down and we will choose to do Photomerge, which is the last option. This is going to present us with a dialog where we need to go through a series of steps. The first that I would recommend is selecting the images themselves. We simply need to go out and browse for those. We'll click on Browse, navigate to the folder that has the images we want, and we can kind of see a preview here of how this image is originally starting out. Now, I purposefully chose one that is not perfect. It was simply taken handheld. It's usually better if you can have something on a tripod. It also is using probably the worst lighting you could ever have, going from the edges into a full sunrise and then over to the other edge. The reason is that I really want to show to you as best I can how Photoshop tries to blend and match these images. So I'm going to press Ctrl-A to select all of the images. Then I'll click OK at the bottom right of the screen. It populates the images. And now we need to make some other choices. The choices are primarily on the left-hand side and have to do with the layout. In other words, what is Photoshop going to do with these images? We can leave it on auto. That means Photoshop is going to analyze the images and try to make a best guess. And honestly, it usually does a pretty good job. We can also choose something called perspective. And I'll try to give you kind of the encapsulated version here. The perspective selects one image as a reference, and usually it's the one in the middle of the series. And the others are then transformed, repositioned, and skewed to make the composite. When you use this cylindrical option, it reduces the images into kind of what looks like an unfolded cylinder, like they were wrapped around the cylinder to begin with. Spherical is similar to perspective, but it actually creates a gradual upper and lower arch. The collage actually allows us to manually decide what the positioning should be. And reposition aligns but does not transform anything. You might want to play with these a little bit. Now, it does take a little bit of time for the panorama to be generated, but going through a couple of different options may give you the best results. For now, we're going to leave this on auto. Just kind of let Photoshop do its thing. At the bottom, make sure that we have the proper checkboxes, which first of all is that we do want to blend the images together. And if you have any issues with vignette, especially if you've been using a wide-angle lens, you can check that box as well. And it will also do some geometric distortion correction. We'll go now to the top right, click OK. And we just sit back, relax, and wait. Don't get too anxious. This can take a while depending on the size of the images as well as the number of images that are involved. It's basically opening each image, doing that comparison, and then doing all of the things that we talked about in the background, including skewing, changing perspectives, resizing, making layers, and blending. After not too long of a wait, this is what we're presented with for this particular set of images. You will notice that because it has to do a lot of the adjustments, that you may have a lot of transparent pixels. This is where you get to see if what you have is going to be usable. By the time you remove those pixels, will you have enough left to actually have an image? If it's not acceptable, then you might go back and choose one of those other layout types to see if that can do a better job. But of course, as with anything in photography, the real answer is take the best series of images you can and leave as much room as possible. Here's my last little tip on panoramas. Don't think horizontal. We often think of wide landscapes, and so we hold the camera in a landscape format. But by taking them vertically, you will need to take more pictures, but you have more room at the top and bottom, preventing some of the issues we see here, which is by the time they're stitched together, there's not a whole lot of information left that creates a nice linear panoramic image. Cropping and doing some of those other things are certainly possibilities now. Everything that you normally do in Photoshop still works, but we let Photoshop do all of the heavy legwork to actually stitch these together and make them look